Good evening, everyone, and warm welcome to another session of COVID-19 Academy. I'm Praveen, and I will be a moderator for the session today. COVID-19 Academy is a capacity building initiative of UNICEF, WHO, HCL Foundation, and Sphere India for volunteers and outreach workers from across India for COVID-19 preparedness and response. Today, we have an interesting session on supporting food security and nutrition in COVID-19 pandemic. As you all know, India is a highly densely populated country, and the pandemic and the resultant lockdown has increased the risk of hunger and malnutrition in our country. The existence of government social nets and government's responses to make these schemes responsive to the needy during the emergency has proved to be a blessing. But this is not sufficient, and all stakeholders have a role to play, especially the civil society that works closely with the community. This course seeks to describe the existing food and nutrition security schemes of the government of India and how the same are being leveraged to maintain food security in the community. The course also looks at additional food security measures put in place and other stakeholders, namely the civil society. Let me introduce our speakers for the day. From World Food Program, Mr. Ankit Sood, Dr. Sharika Yunus Khan, and Ms. Pradnya Paidankar. Mr. Ankit Sood has over 15 years of national and international experience in conceptualizing, designing, and implementing solutions for efficient service delivery, including 7 years of leading transformation in TPDS and WFP as the head of supply chain PDS unit. And Dr. Sharika has over 18 years of experience of working on health and nutrition issues in India and in the South Asia region, including 10 years with World Food Program as the head of nutrition and school feeding unit. Ms. Pradnya, working with WFP for the last 10 years, currently as SDG manager, has more than 25 years of experience in the field of food security, nutrition, health, especially on vulnerability analysis mapping, research, monitoring and evaluation, and program management. It's my pleasure to welcome you all, dear speakers, to the session. And over to you. I'll be sharing the presentation right now. Pradnya. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Praveen. So while the presentation is being set, I'll like to at the onset welcome all of you actually for your participation in this important session on food security amidst this COVID-19 pandemic. I can actually see a lot of organizations and a lot of familiar organizations being part of it. So thank you once again on behalf of World Food Program for your participation and taking time out through your busy schedules. I know that you all are very busy in actually responding to this crisis. So without any further ado, I'll just start with this session, which will cover, I know that 1 hour is very small time to cover such a length and breadth of the overall food security and nutrition situation and COVID's impact on it, even if we consider only for India. We'll try and really make this session useful for all of you. And at the end, we'll also have some question answers, and we are open to responding and working with you going forward. So next slide, please. I'll start straight away with the definition of food security and nutrition. Praveen, if I can ask you to please go to the next slide. Thank you. So as many of you will be aware that the food security, the definition of food security is something which was...
Ms. Pradanya, if I may interrupt, could you please like thoda voice if you could lift?
You are unable to hear? Okay.
I am able to hear, but if you could be a little more louder, that would be great.
Okay, sure, great. So I'll try. Is this better?
Yes, perfect. Loud and clear.
Right. Thank you so much. So food security exists when all people at all times have physical, economic, and social access to sufficient, safe, nutritious food which meets their dietary needs and food preferences for leading a very healthy life. And you can say this definition is a kind of comprehensive definition which was accepted in World Food Summit in 1996. And I'll also like to underline here that this food security should exist at all times. It essentially means that even during crisis. And if we talk about the food security, there are four dimensions which usually are talked about. The first one is availability, which usually refers to the production at more or less aggregate level at the country level. The second one is food accessibility, which actually refers to the access to food, which also means access to markets, purchasing power, functioning supply chains, or food safety nets. The third aspect is food utilization, which is linked to food absorption. So, how the food actually consumed is assimilated by the body and is reflected back in the form of nutritional status. And the last dimension, which is called food stabilization, actually refers to sustainability, and it also indicates the impact of the disasters and maintaining food security even during disasters may be climatic or non-climatic. So food is as we all know, is a fundamental right, and nutrition is integral to food security. So from this perspective, if we talk, there is a very strong legal framework that actually facilitates overall world to emphasize and underscore the need for food and nutrition security for well-being of the mankind. Next slide, please. So now when we are talking about food security, the first important aspect is when we are talking about COVID-19, which is a health crisis, what is the relevance of food and nutrition security? And with all our experiences, we know that it has a huge potential to lead to food crisis if proper steps are not taken. And we all also know that the food and nutrition security is already precarious. SOFI report actually has highlighted that hunger and malnutrition across the globe is on rise. And across the world, there are 820 million people who are suffering from hunger and about 150 million children who are stunted. And unfortunately, India carries about 25% of global burden of food insecurity and malnutrition. However, the situation, I don't want to really paint completely black. There are some very bright spots as well when it comes to India. And specifically, if we talk about the production of food grains, some of you might have known that, I mean, if for this particular year, the food production is estimated at 292 million metric ton, which is one of the highest. And so at the aggregate level, India does produce the food which should be sufficient to feed its own population. However, the existence of these big safety nets, which are one of the world's largest food-based safety nets, is something which is, again, credit to India. And if we talk about the overall emphasis on food security, India has been one of those key countries or pioneering countries which actually have recognized food as a legal right to two-thirds of its population through the National Food Security Act. And National Food Security Act actually encompasses three main food-based safety nets to cover the life cycle approach. And these safety nets include targeted public distribution system, midday meal scheme, which is for school children, and ICDS, which is intended for the children, as well as pregnant mother and lactating mothers. So from the perspective of India's policy and legal framework, there is quite a lot of things which the government is also doing. So from the perspective of food and nutrition security, when we talk about India and its COVID crisis, there are some good news and some bad news. So I'll actually hand it over now to my colleague Ankit, who will be covering the targeted public distribution system, and we'll see how these safety nets actually are really responding to the crisis. Over to you, Ankit.
Thank you, Pradnya. Praveen, if you could shift to the next slide, please. Thank you. So, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So, like Pradnya mentioned, the National Food Security Act makes access to food a constitutional right for 67% of the population, which means nearly 80 crore population of India is entitled to subsidized food grains, which is rice or wheat and coarse grains, uh, every month. Now, when you look at the public distribution system, there are two activities, or let's say there are two reforms that are happening in parallel. One is the implementation of the National Food Security Act, which basically says who are the people who should get it, how much should they get each month, and at what rate. So basically, it says classifies the PDS beneficiaries into two categories, which is the AAY Antyodaya Anna Yojana, which is the poorest of the poor, and the second is the priority households. Now, in total in India, it covers to about 813 million. Now, these AAYs have an entitlement of 35 kgs per household per month, and the priority households have an entitlement of 5 kgs per person per month. Now, while this is happening, there is nutritional support, there is women empowerment happening, where the ration card is supposed to be on the female, on the name of the female head of the household. There are provisions for food security allowances in the NFSA, and there are other provisions of taking food security further through use of fortification and diversification of food baskets, etc. The second thing, which is mostly on the system reform part, is basically the public distribution system was a manual system and had a lot of challenges like leakages, diversions, inclusion exclusion errors. There was lack of accountability, there was lack of transparency. So the Supreme Court in 2011 ruled that the entire system has to be automated. And what we know right now from 2011 up till now, the entire food value chain of the TPDS has been automated in the entire country, barring a few states or a few pockets somewhere. Now, the main objective of the public distribution system is twofold. One is to provide access to food or food security, and the second is to stabilize the prices in the open market. So when you have about 67% of the population accessing food grains, rice and cereal, staples at subsidized prices, and the availability is enough, so the price, they will not be hoarding and the prices will not rise. So these are two main objectives of the TPDS. Next slide, please, Praveen. So at a high level, the public distribution system, let's say, comprises of 5 elements. You have the Food Corporation of India, which is responsible for procurement from farmers. Every year, FCI procures about 70 million metric tons of rice and wheat every year. And that it distributes and moves and stores to the state warehouses. From the state warehouses, it is then moved to the fair price shops or the ration shops or the last mile retail shops that you must have heard of. So there are about 500,000 or 5 lakh fair price shops in the country. Every day, about 250,000 bags of 50 kg each are moved across the country. And then through these fair price shops, about 80 crore beneficiaries avail their entitlement. So rice, as per NFSA, is given to them at rupees 3 per kg, wheat at rupees 2 per kg, and coarse grains at rupees 1 per kg. Now, if you compare it to the economic cost or the market cost of these commodities, so rice, the economic cost of rice, let's say, is about 35 rupees a kg, which means that the government actually bears the subsidy burden of rupees 32 per kg. At the national level, this amounts to close to about 20 billion US dollars each year, which is close to about 1% of our GDP that the government incurs on the food security through the public distribution system alone. Next slide. Now, when you look at the public distribution system on ground, it has multiple layers, multiple components, multiple stakeholders. So starting from farmers, it is a procurement system. Then the paddy is taken to the mills to be processed into rice. Then it is stored in warehouses, moved to fair price shops, and then finally to the beneficiaries. Now, when we say that the entire system is automated, what it means is that for the procurement, there are farmer registration modules. There are paddy procurement systems. Millers have their own systems through which they report the incoming paddy, the outgoing rice. The warehouses, from the warehouses till the FPS, there are supply chain systems that are established. Most of them are online. You can look at the websites of the state's Department of Food and Civil Supplies. You will get all these numbers real time to see how much grain was moved, where did it go by district, by shop, and even to the point that at the fair price shops, biometric enabled point of sale devices have been deployed. Now, what this means is that when a beneficiary, before it gets his grains, they do a biometric authentication, and only then they get their full entitlement. Now, to ensure that there is no denial due to these technology systems that have been put in, there is a pecking order that has been established in the point of sale devices. Basically, what it means is that if Aadhaar authentication fails, then you do 2-3 tries. If there's somebody who's not still enrolled, or Aadhaar number is still not given to them, has not submitted the Aadhaar, then they can get their entitlements in an unauthenticated mode. But the aim is that you automate the entire system, you reduce the diversions, and you increase the accountability and transparency of the system. Next slide, please. Now, for the COVID response, as you know, the biggest impact that the COVID pandemic had was it limited the person-to-person contact, and therefore restricted movement, etc. Now, what it meant was that the PDS system became like the main backbone of providing food security during this pandemic. And what the national government did was, and if you look at this, what are the impacts of the pandemic where you cannot move, there's a loss of livelihood, you do not have incomes, there is a supply and a demand gap. So basically what the national government did was, first it allowed advance allocations. So PDS beneficiaries could take 3 months of their quota in single go in the month of April. That was one. Second, they provided additional entitlements. So they have the regular entitlements under the National Food Security Act of 5 kgs, 35 kgs. But they introduced the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, under which each member would get additional 5 kgs of rice and wheat free of cost for 3 months, and 1 kg of pulses free of cost per household for the next 3 months. Now, to prevent the spread of the pandemic, which through touch, the government of India said requested states to temporarily suspend the use of the biometric point of sale device. Now, further, when there is a supply and demand gap, and there's a demand shock in the market, the government intervened through its market intelligence wings, and it undertook steps to ensure that the hoarding of essential commodities does not take place. So what that means is that in every state, the market intelligence wings were activated. They actually prescribed under the Essential Commodities Act the commodities and the quantities and the prices that each trader could hold with themselves. Now, slowly, gradually, as things began to improve, as the government came to know of certain restrictions, there were additions to the essential commodities like soap, sanitizers were added into the essential commodities. And now with the upcoming Rabi procurement season, the jute bags and HDPE bags are also now brought into the ambit of the Essential Commodities Act. Now, to ensure food security for the vulnerable, at-home delivery or delivery from the fair price shops directly to the homes of these vulnerable people was also recommended, and a lot of states have implemented it. Now, if you look at the map on the right-hand side, you will see that of all these 6 parameters, about 2 states are the ones that have implemented all of them in one go. Others, most of them have implemented 4 out of these 6 parameters. But as we speak right now, the Government of India entitlements of NFSA and the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana has been implemented nationwide, and everybody is getting it. Next slide, please. Now, additionally, what are the additional initiatives that have been undertaken by the states? So, advance allocations. So, if you look at this, there are about 9 states who have on their own allowed state beneficiaries to take advance allocations over and above what the Government of India recommended. So when the Government of India said they could take 3 months, they have even allowed 6 months or 4 months of advance allocation. Some have not allowed more than 3 months of advance allocations, but what they have done, like states like Delhi, etc., they have made the ration free of cost. So even the ration under NFSA it's being distributed free of cost. Now, in terms of additional entitlements over and above what the government of India is providing, there are states there are 6 states: Gujarat, Odisha, Telangana, Karnataka, that have actually started distributing additional commodities like oil, sugar, pulses, and other condiments to its PDS beneficiaries. Next slide, please. Right. Now, in terms of additional commodities, now additional food commodities are being provided at the fair price shops in about 4 states, and some states have even gone a step further and are providing even COVID prevention commodities like sanitizers, gloves, and masks in these states. But now the second thing about the fair price shop is that generally the trend was that in the first 2 weeks of the month, all the beneficiaries would generally queue up and try and take their entitlements with the fear that their entitlement might be lost or might be diverted. Now, to prevent this overcrowding and to ensure social distancing, etc., there are a lot of steps that the states have taken to ensure that, and they have adapted their operations at the fair price shops. So if you see in green, there are a few states that have actually suspended the use of point of sale device and have asked the fair price shops to remain open for a longer time. In other states, only the point of sales device has been suspended. And in a few orange states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka, and Kerala, the extra time for operations has been implemented. So other than working for about 8 hours every day, the time has been extended to about 12 hours. Next, please. Yeah. Now, the PDS has provided, let's say for now, the requirement of cereals and to some extent pulses. But there are other requirements that are also required. And to do that, and also to cater to the loss of livelihoods to some extent, certain states have started cash transfers for the PDS ration card holders. So if you see, there are about 6 states like Bihar, Odisha, Telangana, the southern states of Tamil Nadu, etc., that are actually providing cash transfers to the PDS beneficiaries. This is about 1,000 rupees one-time assistance per month per household. Kerala has provided interest-free loans through their self-help groups to all the poor and vulnerable households, and they can avail of that. Now, the next one is home delivery. Now, a lot of states like Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, Delhi, Odisha, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, they are actually doing food delivery for all the PDS beneficiaries in the entire state. Odisha, for that matter, till about yesterday, had distributed about 70% of 3 months of allocation up till yesterday in the entire state. Next, please. So, as you've seen from here, so the government of India has also adapted the public distribution system, and the state governments have also piggybacked on it to provide the immediate response. The advantage that India holds, and like Pradnya said, was the availability of grains and surplus in their warehouses that could easily be used to mobilize this food security. I'll hand it over to Sharika now to take it over on the school meals. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this session, and I hope all of you find it as useful listening to what we are sharing with you, as happy as we are to share it with you as well. Pradnya talked about the fact that the National Food Security Act in India covers about 3 schemes. One is the public distribution system, which was very ably covered by my colleague Ankit. The other 2 are the midday meal scheme and the integrated child development services scheme. So firstly, let's try and understand a bit about what the midday meal scheme is all about, and then what's happening in the midday meal scheme given the COVID scenario. Next slide, please. Right. So the midday meal scheme, as most of you would know, it's actually the largest school feeding program in the world, and one which, to my mind, is implemented with a fair amount of quality across the country. Of course, there are some ups and downs in different states and even within states in different districts, but it is implemented with a fair amount of quality, and it has some nice let's say, checks and balances also built into the scheme. The scheme is implemented by the Department of School Learning and Education under the Ministry of Human Resource Development, Government of India, and its state counterparts. The primary objective of the scheme is to enhance enrollment, to ensure that the children coming to school continue to be in school, and while they are and at the same time to ensure that there is no learning which is happening on an empty stomach. The total number of beneficiaries that the Government of India has enrolled in the program is about 110 million. This figure, of course, depending upon the enrollment, keeps on increasing and decreasing. And we've also gone up to as high as 129 million in the very recent past as well. The scheme covers children between the ages of 6 to 14 years, which in terms of classes translates to children studying in grades 1 to grade 8. There are some states which sort of add more classes to it so that anybody who's coming to school gets a hot cooked meal in school. However, the number of states which have added classes beyond the guidance of the Government of India pay for it out of their own reserves. Next slide, please. The scheme provides for the younger children, that is the children studying in grades 1 to 5, every hot cooked meal is supposed to provide about 450 kilocalories and 12 grams of proteins, and children studying in the higher grades get about 700 kilocalories and about 20 grams of proteins. So this is what is provided. This is based on a typical, let's say, norms which have been set by the Government of India in terms of grains. So the children in the primary school are supposed to get about 100 grams of the grains. The children in the upper primary are supposed to get 150 grams. Then there are specifications for oil, for condiments, pulses, and vegetables as well. And taking all of that into consideration, these are the protein and caloric norms that each meal is supposed to provide. Next slide, please. Now, coming to what is it that's happening in the middle of COVID. So given that the midday meal is a part of the National Food Security Act, means that it's an entitlement. So state governments and governments of union territories are supposed to be providing a meal to these school children, irrespective of whatever happens on the ground level. And taking that into consideration, there was a letter which went out on the 20th of March from the Ministry of Human Resource Development to the states, asking them to provide midday meals or dry rations in lieu of midday meals, or if the dry rations or the midday meals could not be provided, to provide a food security allowance so that something in the name of midday meal was eventually being transferred to the school children. Next slide. So over the past couple of weeks, we've been trying to map across the country as to what exactly is the status of implementation of the midday meal in the states, given the guidance from the Government of India. Just a little disclaimer is that most of the information that I present to you now has been drawn from media reports, has been drawn from telephonic calls to government stakeholders where we have presence, or to functionaries of development partners who are known to us. So what this graph basically shows, in green are the states where the MDM continues to be functional. When I say functional, there is either a hot cooked meal which is still being provided, or there's a dry ration which is being provided, or there is a food security allowance which is being given out, or perhaps a combination of all of these three. There are also a couple of states where the guidance which has come from the national level has been translated into state level guidance. But we are yet to sort of see that translation of the state level guidance into on-ground action. There are some states in which literally nothing has been done, and of course, despite our best efforts week after week, there are about 4 states and union territories for which we have no information, which are up north in Ladakh, and in the east they are Arunachal Pradesh and the Union Territory of Chandigarh, as well as Andaman and Nicobar. Next slide, please. Now, in this particular slide, I'd really just draw your the idea is to just share with you the subset of the states where something is being done for the midday meals. So I would ask you to sort of not pay too much attention to the states where guidance has been given, or and there's no action on the ground, or states for which information is not available. We are focusing only on the states for which some action is being taken on the ground. We have in green the states which are distributing dry rations, which is a total of, hello? In green, we have states which are distributing dry rations, which is a total of 10 states. In light blue, we have states which are distributing dry rations as well as cash. And I'll come to as to why some states are doing both. And then there are some states which are only giving a food security allowance, which is basically cash. Now, when the states are distributing, what the NFSA actually says is that if for any reason a hot cooked meal cannot be provided in the schools, then dry rations need to be provided. When they say dry rations, they basically mean the grains. And then whatever is the cost per child per day for food conversion, that needs to be provided. So the states which are providing food grains and cash as well, so those are the states which are providing the conversion cost of the food also directly to the beneficiaries. Now, just a few words in terms of what is it that is actually being provided by the states. So most of the states are providing the dry rations in terms of pulses and rice. There are a few states which are visionary enough and are also providing eggs to the children. There are some states which have gone ahead and in addition to rice, pulses and eggs, they're also providing biscuits as well as ready-to-eat products like chickies, etc. In terms of the modality of distribution, wherever these states, wherever the MDM continues to be functional, it's variable. And of course, the crisis does allow for it to be variable. So in some states, there's direct doorstep delivery by the school teachers or the cook cum helpers to the houses of the school children. In some states, the parents of the school children are asked to come up to the school and collect the rations. And in some states, there's also an understanding between the Department of Food and the Department of Education, and the dry rations for the school children are all being provided from the fair price shops. Next slide, please. We can go directly to the next slide, Praveen. Right. So I think most of the people here would already be aware of the Integrated Child Development Services Scheme. Again, a scheme which has literally no parallel in the world, either in terms of coverage or the thought in terms of designing the scheme. I think there are many few countries in the world which would have such a huge commitment on behalf of the government for its women and young children. The overall objective of the scheme, as we already know it, is to reduce infant mortality, child malnutrition, and to provide preschool education. The scheme provides about 6 services, and I'm not going to be talking about all 6 services in the course of my presentation. I'll only be focusing on supplementary nutrition because we're talking all about food security. The scheme, as we already know, it covers children less than 6 years of age, and it covers pregnant lactating women, and the ministry responsible for its implementation is the Ministry of Women and Child Development, along with its counterparts in the states. Next slide, please. We are already aware that as far as supplementary nutrition is concerned, the children between 6 months to 3 years of age receive take-home rations because these children are too young to be able to sit, to be able to come to the Anganwadi centers and to be able to sit there throughout the time that the Anganwadi center is open. The children between 3 to 6 years of age receive a hot cooked meal, and at times the hot cooked meal is broken down into snacks as well as a meal. However, there are some states which just provide it as a hot cooked meal and only one meal. And the pregnant lactating women receive also take-home rations. Next slide, please. Again, the scheme has, for the supplementary nutrition that is provided, there are certain caloric and protein norms which are in place. The caloric norms for children between 6 months to 6 years of age are 500 kilocalories, and the protein norms are 12 to 15 grams. For the severely underweight children, it provides about 800 kilocalories and 20 to 25 grams of proteins. And likewise, there are caloric norms and protein norms for pregnant and lactating women as well. Next slide, please. So on parallel to what the Ministry of Human Resource Development did on the 20th of March, the Ministry of Women and Child Development also put out a guidance to the states around the 30th of March saying that the Anganwadis are closed, but the supplementary nutrition, which is one of the services of the ICDS, continues or needs to be made available, and you could make it available either by continuing to give the hot cooked meal. If you're not able to provide a hot cooked meal, you can give a dry ration. Again, if you're not able to provide a dry ration, you have to give a food security allowance. And all of this was also again a part of the National Food Security Act, which came into being and which makes it mandatory for states to continue to provide these benefits to its beneficiaries. Next slide, please. Yeah. So just like we've been mapping the situation in the country on the midday meals and the public distribution system, we've also been mapping as to what is happening, what exactly is happening in the country as far as the food component of the ICDS is concerned. And what we have in the map here, and this information has also been collected largely from media reports, it's been collected from government counterparts where we have presence, and it's also been collected from functionaries of development partners. It's information that is dated till the 30th of April, but perhaps the best information which is available to us as of date for any duration preceding the 30th of April. There are about 25 states which are distributing a take-home ration for children between 6 to 36 months of age. There are about 3 states where either we have no information or there has been no action. We've not been able to segregate this information further, whether out of the 3, is it in 2 states where no action has been taken, or 1 state where no information is available. We haven't been able to find too much there as far as media reports or internet sources are concerned. There are about 6 union territories which are distributing the take-home rations to children between 6 to 36 months of age. And then there are about 2 union territories for which we've not been able to find information to the best of our capacities. Next slide, please. So what I'm showing to you slide after slide is segregation of what is happening in the country, given the different beneficiary categories in the ICDS. So if I look at beneficiaries between 3 to 6 years, there are about 25 states which are distributing take-home rations, in which the state of Bihar is actually providing cash as an entitlement to children between 3 to 6 years of age. And in Telangana, they continue to provide hot cooked meals. However, after taking due precautions in the provision of hot cooked meals. There are about 3 states for which information is either not available or perhaps no action has been taken on the ground. There are about 6 union territories which are distributing take-home rations, and about 2 for which either no action has been taken or for which information is not available on the ground. Next slide, please. So this is what we have similar to the slides which are in place for the children. This is the slide that we have for pregnant and lactating women. Now, if I look at the states which are doing distribution of food, for the younger age group, it's usually a blended food product, which is like a blend of rice and pulses, which is being powdered, extruded, and then it's given. For the pregnant lactating women, as well as for children between 3 to 6 years of age, there are dry rations of oil, pulses, rice, etc., which are being provided, and it varies from state to state. There's no common rule in terms of what is being given across the states. However, there are also some exceptions. There are some states where perhaps a blended food product may be offered to children in the older age group, and a blended food product may also be ordered to perhaps pregnant and lactating women. So we do also have states which have that sort of exceptions. In terms of the modality of distribution, most of the states are distributing it through the Anganwadi workers as well as the Anganwadi helpers. In some states, they are piggybacking on the women's self-help groups to get the distribution done. In some states, they've also asked the parents to come to the Anganwadi centers and collect the entitlements for the child. So it varies, like I said, from state to state, and even within a state, there may be a variation in terms of how this is being done. Now, before I end my before I end my presentation, one thing that I would sort of say is that, or perhaps leave behind as a few things that you might want to think through, is that India, we already know, is in a situation, I mean, our malnutrition levels, the prevalence that we have are fairly high. We are now faced with a situation where there has been disruption in the provision of health and nutrition services. I mean, when I say health and nutrition services, I'm talking about other services like iron folic acid supplementation, the vitamin A supplementation, etc. In some states, there's also been no action as far as the supplementary nutrition is concerned. So under these circumstances, is it just enough to be providing food? Or do we need to look at what is the food being provided? Shouldn't we look at providing foods which are more nutritious and more age appropriate? Because gradually the food insecurity and the hunger would start having ramifications or implications on malnutrition levels. And we may be posed to perhaps enter into a state where our malnutrition levels are more than what we know it now. With these words, I'll hand it over to my colleague Pradnya, who will take us beyond the safety nets. Over.
Spradnya, are you there? Please unmute yourself if you have missed it. Miss Pradnya? Okay, she seems to be lost.
Just give me 1 minute. I'm sort of getting in touch with her.
Thank you.
Acha, okay, let me just tell them. Praveen, so she's trying to unmute herself for the past several minutes, but apparently the prompt that she's getting is that she cannot unmute because the host has muted her. Can you please have a look?
Acha, let me check.
Yeah, let me fix that.
Okay.
Pradanya, can you try unmuting yourself now?
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry for the inconvenience. Yeah, we can hear you now.
You can now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So
Sorry
there was
for
some
the trouble. Yeah.
No, that's okay. I think it was giving a message that I was
Yeah,
muted.
right. Yes, yes.
Right. So Thank you, Sharika. And we now go to the next part. So again, linking it to the first slide from where I started, where we talked about the food security and various dimensions of it. So Praveen, can you please go to the next slide? So when we talk about these food safety nets, we talked about the food access, and given the current COVID crisis, if we really want to say that the food security is achieved, then naturally we also need to look at who are the people who are still left out of these uh, three food-based safety nets or National Food Security Act. And we really need to understand and see who are the people who are still left out, who are unreached, and how to really reach them. So when we talk about National Food Security Act, as Ankit has stated, that 67% of Indian population is covered, 75% in rural and 50% in urban areas. However, this itself actually means that there would be some proportion of persons who will not be really covered under this PDS, and specifically under the crisis situation, they will be exposed to food security. Uh, ICDS is, of course, a universal scheme, but for MDM as well, those who are not enrolled will not be covered under this particular scheme. So from that perspective, even within the schemes, if we talk about the coverage, there are some percentage of population which will be left out who really deserve to be part of it. Then additionally, if we talk about the migrants, the current crisis is actually really targeted, or we can say that the most vulnerable and most exposed people are the migrants or the urban poor or those people who are street vendors. So from that perspective, if we look at, so out of 400 million migrants, only zero point 0.6 million are in relief shelter and 2.2 million have been provided food. So we are not even very sure that how much was the reverse migration. So when we talk about the other vulnerable groups which are not really reached by these food safety nets, then again maybe a smaller percentage, but then they are in real dire need of the food, and they are exposed to the risk of food insecurity and eventually of the malnutrition. Next slide, please. So, I mean, if we talk about who are really food insecure, I will just like to draw your attention on two surveys which are done by some of the civil society partners. The two surveys are, one was Jan Sahas survey, which was done in the second and third week of lockdown among about 300, 196 migrant construction workers. And there was a SWAN report, which was covering around 11,115 workers. And both these surveys, they actually point out at very starking gaps in terms of the food security. So 14% laborers do not have ration cards. So if you don't have ration card, you don't get it. So if the scheme that Ankit actually described and the PM Garib Kalyan Yojana, if we talk about, so if the scheme only caters to the people who have ration card, then naturally those who don't have will not be included in it. 94% of construction workers do not have identity cards and they're not eligible for benefits declared by the government. So we know the dire situation in urban areas where construction workers, they just migrate and come. They probably don't have even the Aadhaar card or even other identity card which can help them to claim the benefits. A lot of workers, they don't have information about these measures, and even if they have information about it, they don't know how to access the information or how to really access the benefits of those schemes. And that is where actually I think we have a big gap and a role to play. If we talk about Jansaha's database of approximately 60,000 workers, 17% of workers do not have bank account. And therefore, even if, again, under government scheme, and I don't think, I'm not repeating or listing down the measures that government has declared under Garib Kalyan Yojana. So it has even uh, depositing amounts to Jan Dhan account of people and all. But for those who don't have account, how do they get it? And even if they have account and they got the money, they are not able to go to the bank to withdraw the money and purchase the food. So from that perspective as well, there is a need to really look at the issues which are evolving in the current COVID context. So in fact, if we really look at SWAN report as well, I mean, that also highlights the dire situation. Next slide, please. So as we have said that besides these 3 safety net schemes, for covering these uncovered population under these food safety net schemes, government has announced many measures. So one, of course, is Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan scheme, NULM, which is actually now merged into Deen Dayal Shahari Rozgar Yojana. So even under that, they have expanded the coverage of usual shelter homes to provide food. Food Corporation of India, actually, I mean, Ankit also mentioned about this open market system where they have started giving ration to NGOs so that they start distributing the foods. Uh, there are some state governments who actually are moving towards universalization of PDS, or actually relaxing the norms of distribution during this crisis for maybe 3 months or for maybe 6 months. They are actually distributing food based on Aadhaar. If they have, there's some states are actually coming out with innovative measures. And in fact, I mean, you working in the field, you will have those kinds of things which the state governments are initiating. Many states have actually also expanded the food basket and added some more commodities to it. Cash transfers are being done, and pensions are being advanced, allocations are done in advance. So in fact, if we talk about overall situation, the government has at this point in time responded quite a bit, and they have also established these empowered groups in Niti Aayog, and there is call to civil society and NGOs, and there is also a great recognition to the work which is put in by NGOs, and in a response which is given by Government of India to Supreme Court, it is stated that 37% of meals of total around 85 lakhs to vulnerable population were provided by NGOs in the first few weeks of COVID lockdown. And in some of the states like Andhra Pradesh and Gujarat, the percentage was more than 90%. If we talk about the overall the shelters and camps for the stranded population or for the migrants, 40% of such camps were also set up by NGOs, and again the percentage was very high in some of the states like Maharashtra. So when we talk about this unprecedented crisis, we all understand that it is not just one entity's job to tackle with it, and it is a shared responsibility. And in fact, if there is a continuous flow of information that something is not happening somewhere, the food security is the situation is very bad, or the situation is really getting worse in certain pockets, highlighting that to the local administration, district administration, working with the district administration, finding the solution, mobilizing the resources, doing the community mobilization, making people aware, helping them to access the services, and working with the government as well to make those services available is something which is actually a kind of role that is extremely important to play. And that is a gap at this point in time, which has been very nicely filled by the civil society. So civil society has really stood up to the challenge and is really helping this. The question still remains of when we talk about the four pillars, the sustainability, how sustainable this will be, how these resources will be really covered. Next slide, please. So
Excuse
when
me,
we,
Miss Pradnya,
sure,
just a gentle reminder on the time. Thank you.
sure. So this
Yeah.
is like my, I think, last slide, the next slide. So when we talk about uh, the key activities and the major role for civil society as well as other stakeholders is to really identify who are the most vulnerable. So in urban areas, maybe the migrants and stranded population are most vulnerable, but whereas in rural areas, because of the lockdown, some of the rural and tribal communities are really most vulnerable. We also know that whenever the food distribution happens in certain communities, women and girls, they are unable to go and access the services, so they actually become most vulnerable. We have also seen that in many reports that people have already started reverting back to the coping strategies by reducing the number of meals or by reducing the portion sizes, by reducing the variety. And usually we all know that there is a household level food insecurity and women will eat the last and the least. And this will actually impact to the precarious situation which I described at the very first on the nutrition. So from the perspective of food and nutrition security, COVID has a potential to really create adverse impact on food and nutrition security. And I would say that a lot has been done by civil society and other stakeholders, but a lot will need to be done. And I'll stop there, and we are happy to take questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ankit, Ms. Pradanya, and Dr. Sharikwa for the wonderful presentation. And now we will be taking questions from the participants. As usual, we will be taking some questions from the participants who have raised their hands and also from the chat box. Let's start from the participants who have raised the hands. Uh, let's start from Neelam Singh. Neelam Singh, I'm going to unmute you right now. You may speak.
Praveen, can you be a little louder, please? This is one.
I'm sorry. Can you? Am I audible now?
Yeah, that's
Miss Neelam Singh. Okay. Um, let's go to another speaker. Karuna Karpani.
Hello.
Hello, Mr.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, please.
Yeah, am
You're
I
audible.
audible?
Yes,
Yeah,
you're
am I
audible.
audible? Yeah.
Yes, you're audible.
In context of UP, I'm speaking in context of UP, as it was said during the presentation that the food grains and other things are being distributed. But the practical thing is, it is not the way it was presented. So, as an NGO workers, what are we going to do in that cases? Because this food grains and all these things, and especially this ICDS, that has all means completely stopped. Midday meal, ICDS functional, they are completely stopped. So, as an NGO workers, how are we going to approach the things?
Praveen, do you expect us to answer it as we go along?
Yes, please, ma'am. Yeah,
Okay.
right.
So I'll answer the ICDS and the MDM bit, and then Ankit can come on the PDS. Firstly, thank you so much for that question. What I would suggest is that perhaps it requires you to engage with the district administration or the state administration. Perhaps, I mean, just reminding them that there is a National Food Security Act which is in place, and as a part of the act, the food needs to be made available. And perhaps also sharing with them that there are other states who are doing it, and there are some states who are actually going beyond what the NFSA does and putting things in place. So to my mind, hopefully this should help, but we also know that it's not just a function of policies being in place. It's a sum total of governance issues, etc. But to my mind, sharing what other states are doing, perhaps that may get them motivated to take some action. Ankit, over to you.
Sure. Now, in terms of PDS, I think that is already distributed, because one thing that UP has done is not disabled its point of sale devices. And the grains are given by after Aadhaar authentication, even now. So what they've done is, first 15 days of the month, they distribute the NFSA grains, and the next 15 months, they distribute the PMGKY grains. I mean, within this month, they've finished the entire quota of April, and in one day, UP had distributed about 21% of PMGKY rations. But now the question is that what can NGOs do, or how do you assist? Now, like it was mentioned in the presentation, there are options that you could procure directly from the FCI at a competitive price. So if the market price is 35, FCI generally sells it at about 25, 26 rupees a kg. So that is one avenue for you to do. There's a Supply Mitra portal where NGOs register and they can provide services. They get approval from the district administration and passes as well. So I think depending on what your forte is, what your area of work is, and what are the issues that you're channeling, I think that using the portal and food from these various sources could be one way of substituting it.
Thank you, Pratni and Ankit. Let's move on to the second question. We have Balbir Singh. Balbir Singh, I'm going to unmute you right now. You may ask your question.
Hello.
Yeah, thank
Hello.
you. Right, please go on. You're audible.
Yeah. So my question is about the issue which was raised about the non-activated accounts. A large number of people have received money, but the accounts are deactivated because they are not using the accounts frequently. So can't you people at an advocacy level can do something at the higher level so that the banks can debit the amount from the deactivated accounts?
Thank you. Over to you, speakers.
I think, this is a very good suggestion as well. What I would suggest is it would be good to actually get such kind of suggestions, and we can add it in our advocacy efforts at the national government level as well. For example, I'll just quote that some of the state governments have included Anganwadi workers in the COVID warrior list, and they are providing the insurance cover to those as well. This is something which was declared, I think, in Madhya Pradesh recently, and this was one of the advocacy point which was actually a recommendation given by us to the government of India. So slowly this will happen, but then the most important thing is how this information and the red flags are communicated and at various levels, and the advocacy is done. So I think that's a very good point and well noted. Thank you.
Thank you. We have few questions on the chat box as well. So let me scroll down for some of them. One of the question is, situation at ground level is different from what the police policies at state. For example, in the northeastern states, situation is much worse. So what we can do about that?
Well, we'll have to be a bit more specific about which situation are we talking about. So if whoever's asked the question could elaborate a bit more.
Okay, I think that was the question. So let's move on to another question then. What about the people who are unable to show their NFSA cards for government benefit? Is there any mechanism for them to avail these benefits?
So the question is if they're unable to show or they're not part of the PDS. So that's two different problems. So one could be if they are, let's say, disabled, elderly, whatever, and they cannot come to the store. So there are helpline numbers where almost every state government is delivering at home. So that could be availed of. If you do not have a ration card, I think right now most of the states, even the big ones, have what they've done is they've converted the waiting list also into temporary ration cards and are providing assistance. But depending on which state you are, I think the best would be to contact your district supply office or your district magistrate. And considering this pandemic, there is I think that it's a general consensus among the governments to provide assistance as and when they can. They just need to know who the needy are, which is the biggest part for the government to know right now.
Thank you, Mr. Ankit. Uh, Before moving on to the next question, can we take a couple of more questions since the time has passed? So one or two questions more. Speakers?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So another question on the chat box was, what are the responses for floating populations like migrants, slum dwellers, etc. on food security as they are not entitled to get schemes where they are staying?
Well, let me start with the PDS. First, it's not entirely true. There are two types of portability that is implemented in the public distribution system. So let's say you're a resident of a state and you've moved districts. So states allow you to pick up grains through that. And there's also national portability, among which there are about 12 states that are part of the national portability. But again, yes, the awareness about national portability with the disabling of the point of sale device, it's a bit limited. But depending on the state where you are, and especially I think NGOs can check this and support the people on ground with this kind of information, which you can easily get from the Government of India's national portal, which is nfsa.gov.in. So including helpline numbers, the contact numbers of DSOs per state, the national helpline numbers. So you can get all the information from there, uh, from the PDS perspective. Yes.
I will just like to add a bit to what Ankit said. So in case, I mean, for example, the family has taken their quota from elsewhere and a couple of people from the same family are stranded somewhere else and are unable to access PDS. In such circumstances, they actually will need to be linked to this food distribution, which is happening in the urban shelters and urban locations through NGOs. And in fact, many NGOs are actually working with these migrants to trace back their homes and link them to the food security services. Over.
Thank you so much. Let us take our last question from the participants. So let's see, we have Trisha Sarkar. Trisha, I'm going to unmute you now. Please. Yes, please. Okay, Trisha has muted her again. So she seems to have no questions. Next, we can have Amlan Senapati. Amlan, I'm going to unmute now. Amlan, can you hear us? Yeah.
Yes, yes. Hello.
Ah,
Good
please.
afternoon to all.
Good
Good
afternoon.
afternoon. My question is that if some person has not renewed his labor card uh, previously, how can he benefit it?
So in fact, I mean, if the labor card is not renewed, this is again a responsibility of the employer as well. And there are some guidelines which actually are recently issued by Labor Department on this. So when we are talking about, I mean, when I said that some of these people, they are unable to really get registered and get these cards issued and all that. So one of the responsibilities as an NGO we should do is like helping them to really get access to the website to get them registered and work with the employers to have that issued. Over.
Yeah. Thank you you so much, dear speakers, for the wonderful session and the question answers as well. So it's been a pleasure, and for the future sessions and tomorrow's as well, I request my colleague Valerie to share. Yeah, thank you, Valerie. So, for your any queries regarding the courses or any other issues you're facing, please do write to
Praveen, you are
us.
not audible. You'll have to be louder, please. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Valerie. Yeah. Am I audible now?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I hope. So, for more information, suggestions, and if you have if you're facing any trouble logging in or certification issues, please write to us and or feedbacks as well at COVID-19 Academy at sphereindia.org.in. And to complete the course evaluation and to receive certificate, you may please visit our website, sphereindia COVID-19 academy.org.in, after 24 hours of the completion of this session. So you can log in tomorrow and attend an interesting quiz, and you can download your certificate. While downloading certificate, please make sure that you are providing the email ID, the exact same email ID you have used for registering for this session. So we are announcing our next two sessions here. On 23rd of April, tomorrow, we will be having a session on understanding gender mainstreaming and addressing GBV in human action, and role of youth volunteers in promoting gender equality and addressing GBV as part of the COVID-19 response on April 24. Both the sessions are on 4 to 5 p.m. Thank you so much again. Thank you, dear speakers, and thank you, participants, for the wonderful presence and discussions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Praveen, Valerie, and to the participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
You too. Thank you so much.